Incidental music is an everyday part of our media viewing experience. Its job, whether for a movie, TV show, or YouTube video, is a deceptively tricky one. To support and heighten the drama on screen. Such non-diegetic music is meant only for the audience, not for the characters. Some programs fill the air with familiar pop songs.
Hello, Ace.
Hi.
While others use traditional or classical pieces. Each type stirs within us thoughts and emotions, reflecting those of the characters and their stories.
Timmy, Zoe, get away from there!
Original incidental scores can be melodic, producing themes that stay with us all our lives, or atmospheric, engaging the senses mainly through our subconscious.
There is nothing to be afraid of.
In the 1960s and early 1970s, Doctor Who, like most BBC programs, sourced incidental music in two ways. Stock music, also known as library or production music, was often classical, modern classical, or even avant-garde recordings called into service. This was a lower cost option, and nearly 24 stories of the first 7 seasons, almost half, chose this, whether due to the director's personal preference or to budgetary restraints. Specially composed music, the second option, was used as much as possible and featured especially in the first 3 seasons. Composers for television faced challenges in this era, somewhat different than today. Early Doctor Who was not recorded live, but as close to live as possible onto videotape. This was technology only a few years old, so videotapes were expensive, and splicing them for editing was discouraged, though basically always necessary. Incidental music was added much like live theater. It was pre-recorded, and the recordings, sometimes on vinyl, more often on tape, played on cue by the Grams operator during the performance, the so-called telerecording. So how did composers know what to write, and how much time did they have to write it? Norman Kay wrote music for 3 stories of season 1, including the very first. His daughter Serena writes about her father's work. He often composed just to a camera script, working closely with the director to try to realize their vision, but he never had long to create his incidental music. Tristram Cary, composer of 5 original Doctor Who scores, says the usual thing would be to go through the scripts with the director and mark them up with cues. In the case of the Daleks, his eventual tape manipulation-based soundtrack involved a process of trial and error. I probably did some experimental tracks, and then they would have okayed it or said, can you get it a little more mysterious or a little more ominous? Preparing music for an almost live telerecording had obvious issues, as Cary articulates. There was always a problem with timing. Except for the pre-filmed stuff, dialogue scenes nearly always took longer than you thought. Longtime series composer Dudley Simpson was more explicit. It was guesswork. The director would say, I'm sending you a script for our new serial, have a look at it. It was all very vague. We had to work to stopwatches. In the 2009 DVD documentary about his work, Simpson describes the process specifically. They'd say, we'd like about 15 seconds of something here and a link there, and that's how I wrote it. An existing track list for Episode 3 of Planet of Giants, Simpson's first work on the show, documents such instructions. 3 minutes sustained effort and achieving purpose is exactly the sort of description directors like Mervyn Pinfield gave to composers, and reflects exactly the kind of intangible direction composers must translate into music.
Okay, we'll leave one by one.
Although lengthy clips could be faded out to fit a scene, Simpson describes a, to my mind, painful editing process. If they said to me, "It's too long," I would have to tell them where to snip it. That's how primitive it was then. I'd have to find an actual spot in the music where they could physically cut the tape. This resulted in truncation of longer tracks,
Looks splendid.
Better than you do.
or sometimes a repeated loop of a single section. Despite being non-diegetic, actors could hear the music and sometimes were able to time their lines around it. Simpson says they used to play it to the people on the floor and say, "This is your music." It gave the actors a good cue. They used to say it helped them put some feeling or action into it. Such performances of the soundtrack during camera rehearsals actually triggered an extra fee for the production, so it's not clear if all actors were so lucky. To understand these composers' work in real terms, let's look at some examples of 60s Doctor Who incidental music. In these 4 case studies, I'll outline the composer's timeline from commission to recording to telerecording. I'll document the amount heard in each 25-minute or so episode and compare those figures with contemporary documentation. I'll examine the reuse of tracks within a story and produce evidence of any unused tracks based particularly on extant recordings. Finally, I'll describe a few rare instances of track recycling. A completely complete discussion of all this will be available to my Patreon subscribers. On screen, I will indicate when a sidebar on the current discussion is available especially for you. So, you might want to join right now. Director Waris Hussein asked for composer Norman Kay to be commissioned for the very first serial, 100,000 BC, on the 9th of September 1963. He officially was on the 13th, and he recorded on the 18th for the episode 1 telerecording on the 27th. In preparing an article about Kay's music for this story, I did my own deep dive by personally quantifying the music as well as delving into existing music-related documents, and did the same, of course, for each case study. As I soon discovered, the BBC's own paperwork could be equal parts revealing and deceiving. Every Doctor Who story has contemporary paperwork related to its production that still exists. One such set is the Program as Broadcast, or P-as-B documents. Amongst the information notated here is the amount of music used, theoretically heard, in the finished program. Whether library tracks, pop music, or bespoke incidentals, it is accounted for accurate to the second, theoretically. This ensured that, with the music's use and copyright status clearly indicated, composers, usually on a per-minute basis, were properly paid. Quite right, too. The PSBs for this story's 4 episodes indicate the following amounts of Norman Kay's music. When you see timings of this kind in articles, or, my favorite, in DVD and Blu-ray info text, they are quoting from these documents. So then, that's a total of 29 minutes over roughly 90 minutes of story.
That's not right.
Compelled by a sense of curiosity as well as skepticism, I timed the use of Kay's music myself and came up with the following totals. That totals 19 minutes 17 seconds of incidental music, approaching 5 minutes per episode on average. The PSB is not even close. Interesting. Whichever totals one uses, neither account for track reuse, something I sensed was common practice. To confirm this, particularly in the first two cases, I made a separate recording of the program's audio and listened. Reuse occurs almost instantly in the first episode, as Kay's opening creepy passage of bass clarinet, harp, and percussion supports both the scenes of Susan doubting the word of a French Revolution text, and later Ian and Barbara exploring the junkyard in search of her, subsequently locating a humming police box.
What a mess.
This track has a third iteration in the third episode as cave woman Her wakes, spying Old Mother leaving their cave to release the four strangers. Here are the three tracks overlaid together, proving they are the same recording.
That's not right.
What a mess.
Each of the three cutaway scenes depicting Susan's school troubles, where she proves to be either too smart or too ignorant, involve another track made of unnerving clusters by the trumpets with bass clarinet, harp, and timpani in attendance. You'll have to listen past the three simultaneous scenes of dialogue, but the music lines up precisely.
Yes, I can see red turns to blue, Mr. Jetton, but that's because we're dealing with two inactive chemicals. They only act in relation to each other.
But that's the whole point of the experiment, Susan.
Yes, it's a bit obvious, isn't it? Well, I'm not trying to be rude, but couldn't we deal with two active chemicals? Then let the term grow all by itself and we could get on with something else. Of course, the decimal system hasn't started yet. I'm sorry, it was just an idea.
New tracks in episode 2 are reused as well. As the doors of TARDIS open to reveal alien sand and strange birds wheeling in another sky, we hear
Ian, come out and look.
a still, dry track of harp, vibraphone, and timpani. This track recurs a further 3 times. The complete version is the second iteration, beginning when the Doctor frets about TARDIS retaining its police box appearance.
How very disturbing.
Kay's idiosyncratic cadence of trumpets and bass clarinet, leading to some harp, drum, and bass responses, is heard 5 times total. Only twice is the track heard to completion, in the episode 2 scene, beginning with the tribe's children play attacking an animal skin, and in the episode 4 scene where Cal enters the Cave of Skulls to discover the strangers have made fire, and he and Za begin their fight to the death. The 3 other examples fade out before the horns continue their phrases. The most reused track, 8 times, is one of the simplest, heard primarily in episode 2. This is a very subtle cue, a steady drum beat punctuated by a light cymbal strike after 8, then 12 beats. Laying the following low dialogue versions together actually brings out the cymbals and confirms the track's duplication. In contrast to these examples, 9 tracks, fully half, are used exactly once. Episode 2's first 2 tracks are unique, though they resemble others. Music of the shot of Cal staring bewildered at a blue tree is the cadence, but used only as a sting and in a higher key. The last 5 tracks of episode 4 are also unique, including the final track heard as we view a petrified jungle on the TARDIS scanner. It sounds very much like the dry track from episode 2, but before it fades, a bass clarinet joins it, proving it is distinct.
Good night. Good night.
Good night, Sue.
Unused tracks are rare artifacts at this time. In the case of Kay's soundtrack, which is not known to exist separately, there is a surprising example. The so-called pilot episode, the first failed attempt at telerecording An Unearthly Child, miraculously still exists. One track of Kay's music heard there was not reused in the remount of the episode due to script rewrites. The roughly 1 minute long cue is heard during an extended, enigmatic scene where Susan gives herself a Rorschach test, but ends up drawing a soon-to-be familiar hexagonal shape. This track is significant not only as surviving unused music, but because, pragmatist that he evidently was, Kay recycled it, did a touch of revision, and re-recorded the track for his third and final story, The Sensorites. Curiously, when the pilot episode was shown on BBC Two in 1991, the PSB for the broadcast listed the same 9 minutes as it did for An Unearthly Child, despite having demonstrable differences and still being nowhere near that amount in truth. In total, I found 18 discrete cues in Norman Kay's soundtrack for the broadcast 100,000 BC, totaling only 10 minutes 3 seconds of recorded music. This means just under half of what you hear in these 4 episodes is reused music. In other words, dramatic needs required doubling the music to satisfy director Waris Hussein. Unlike today, 60s Doctor Who directors chose their composers, allowing each story to offer intriguing contrasts of musical style and sound, as well as settings, characters, and monsters. Despite the innovative modernism of the theme music, nearly all specially composed incidental music of this earliest period uses ensembles of acoustic instruments. Norman Kay's 3 scores fit into that category. In fairness, few composers were fluent, let alone interested, in cutting-edge methods of music making. Writing for orchestral and/or keyboard instruments was what most composers were trained for, and scoring for such ensembles allowed them to work at speed to meet deadlines. For most of the 60s, the electric organ was one of the only examples of advanced musical technology. The series' second story, a far-flung futuristic adventure on a post-nuclear world, and featuring no bug-eyed monsters, well, almost no, clearly required something completely different. Something new and far out.
It's all right.
Practically the only freelance composer candidate for such a job was known to director Christopher Barry. Tristram Cary was successfully combining his love of music and electronics in his film and TV work, and his singular soundtrack to The Daleks is a marvel of tape-based musique concrète. There is almost no information about Cary's submission timeline, though a letter from Barry to Cary dated the 9th of December 1963, confirming receipt of the music tape for The Ambush, that's episode 4, telerecorded the 13th, and sending him a list of music requirements for The Expedition, that's episode 5, suggests strongly that Cary was working week to week, a likely unique scenario for this era.
What's fascinating?
Cary's work makes a fine case study because his soundtrack exists and has twice been released commercially. So we can accurately gauge how much music he produced, as well as how much was used, reused, and unused. First, let's look at the PSB documents. This is a grand total of 19 minutes, 46 seconds heard in the 7 episodes. Now, let's fact-check them by comparing my own timings. My grand total is 21 minutes 18 seconds, averaging just over 3 minutes per episode. At last, some accuracy. Still not perfect though, only episode 7 comes within 10 seconds of the, quote, truth of my timing. A great challenge with musique concrète is that it can be difficult to distinguish between sound effects, Brian Hodgson's work, and Carey's music. Without access to the soundtrack, I would have assumed more than one of Carey's tracks was Hodgson's, and this might possibly account for the discrepancies. I'm surprised Hodgson didn't go on strike over demarcation. Meanwhile, let's add one further timing to the mix: the length of Carey's soundtrack based on the commercial releases. The 2017 version adds a few more tracks, but duplicates others when compared to the 2003 version. Yet, it is the most complete, and so is my primary source. By my timescale, the soundtrack is made of 31 discrete tracks of 27 minutes, 44 seconds. As with 100,000 BC, directors Christopher Barry, 4 episodes, and Richard Martin, 3 episodes, reused tracks to suit their dramatic purposes. Several proved useful in creating musical continuity. City music and its variations are heard 9 times over the course of 4 episodes, and no surprise, are reused when viewing the Dalek city from afar. They are heard also as either the TARDIS crew or later the Thals approach to enter the city. Notice how, with city music numbers 1 and 3, the middle of the track, where a ringing effect crescendos, is not used. The track entitled The Daleks is first heard in the breathtaking cliffhanger to episode 1. And the tiniest reprise, barely noticeable, opens episode 2. Later in that episode, we get an essentially complete version of the track for the Daleks' first immortalizing appearance.
You will move ahead of us and follow my directions. This way. Immediately.
A few other longer tracks are lucky enough to be heard in their entirety, or essentially so. Inside the City is heard in an episode 3 bridging of 2 scenes. The Daleks plan to lure their prisoners into
A false sense of security.
and this crossfades to the prisoner's cell. Where they are awakened by a Dalek at the door. The fight underscores Susan bluffing a real Dalek to let the Doctor, Barbara, and the fake Dalek, Ian, pass a checkpoint and into a lift in episode 4.
Help me to get them inside.
Fluid Link is found in the cliffhanger and reprise to episodes 4 and 5, respectively, as Ian realizes the 4 are trapped on Skaro with an inoperable TARDIS.
It's down there somewhere. It must be down there somewhere. In the city. In the city.
In contrast to these, Carey speaks of deliberately overshooting things to ensure enough music was provided. This is proven by a substantial portion of unused material from the existing soundtrack, and is most noticeable, or noticeably lacking, in the final 3 episodes. The Cave Number 1, amongst several tracks featuring sounds of electronically altered gongs,
Getting narrow.
is the most rudely treated. The track is 2 minutes 8 seconds, but only the first 14 seconds is ever heard at the beginning of the episode 6 cave scene that uses it. The Swamp, a 2 minutes 33 second track used in episode 5 as the expedition reaches the swamp, uses only 4 short clips totaling 53 seconds. True, the last short clip makes it into the episode 6 reprise. Heartbeats, a 2 minute 18 second track used in the build-up to the cliffhanger of episode 6,
I'm ready whenever you are.
fares a bit better, but must cut out after 1 minute 23 to fit the scene. The Cave Number 2, the only lengthy track of the final episode, fares best.
Been a fall of rock. The way's blocked.
Did you look all around it?
Yes.
As the 2 minutes 22 second track supports 1 minute 35 of the desperate scene where the expedition believes they've reached a dead end.
This far. Done our best. More.
There are a few instances of loops and other edits to extend tracks. The best example is episode 4's The Ambush. That is, the track with the same name as the episode. This cue is 2 minutes long on the soundtrack, though with a concluding funeral chords track overlapping at the end. This overlap occurs in the program, so is justifiably replicated. The funeral track is included separately in 2017's release. The first scene that uses the ambush starts from the beginning. And the second continues where the first left off. The third longest scene of Themis's speech and his subsequent murder by the Daleks consists of an edited track made only of the middle 1 minute 6 of the original. Starting again with the music from the second scene, it is repeated and altered, including a tiny increase in speed and pitch, to last 2 minutes 4 seconds in the program, excluding the final moments of solo funeral chords. Before we leave the Daleks, the story that secured the success of this now institution, there's another figure to compare. Of the existing 27 minutes 44 seconds of soundtrack, how much, excluding reuse, found its way into the program? That total is 16 minutes 29 seconds, just under 60% of Carey's produced soundtrack. However, comparing this timing of soundtrack used to the 21 minutes 18 seconds of total music heard yields a mere 22.6% reuse. That is, a large proportion of music is used once, only for specific scenes. A much larger proportion than 100,000 BC, or as we will see, any of the other cases. Finally, classic Who viewers may know that this soundtrack became stock music and was recycled in subsequent 60s stories. But that too is another story.
Becca! Becca! Where are you?
Season 4 revealed a new Doctor Who, the revolutionary, regenerative idea that secured the program's longevity. But after a wealth of work provided to composers in William Hartnell's time in the role, there now emerged a new austerity. One person rose out of the scrum to become the go-to composer of original incidental music.
Who are you? Answer!
In the Patrick Troughton era, Dudley Simpson scored 8 of 21 stories, scores that would secure his future. Curiously, only one other composer obtained a commission for this miserly program. That was thanks to someone who wouldn't hire Simpson. Douglas Camfield, a rightly lauded director, gave Simpson his second job on the show, Season 2's The Crusade. Subsequently, for reasons that have been obscured and even exaggerated, he did not hire Simpson again on the program. He would direct several further stories, including one with music by Tristram Cary. But Camfield was one of a set of directors that sometimes preferred stock music. For Season 6's epic Cybermen adventure, The Invasion, Camfield hired composer and jazz violinist Don Harper. Harper had worked with Camfield recently on an episode of the anthology series Out of the Unknown. The Invasion score, his only one for Doctor Who, is similarly orchestrated. Both scores feature an instrument not used before or since in Doctor Who, the cymbalum, a Hungarian dulcimer, which is basically a type of zither where metal strings are struck by light hammers rather than strummed. Like the Daleks, we are blessed that Don Harper's complete soundtrack exists and was commercially released in 2018. Let's go through all the, to borrow a phrase, too much information. Two dates are given for Harper's soundtrack recordings, and it's possible both sessions took place, but the later date, 16th of September 1968, has a bit more evidence in my mind for being the sole date. Assuming this, that's 4 days before telerecording on the 20th. However, the booking for the first possibly postponed session occurred as early as the 12th of August, and amusingly, Harper was post-contracted for his work on the 10th of October, so who knows when he unofficially got the gig. Next, the PSB documentation, which for the first time in my studies is irritatingly inaccurate and irrelevant. All 8 episodes of the story are credited with precisely 4 minutes of Harper music, totaling 32 minutes. As I shall now demonstrate,
empirical poppycock.
Here are my own, comparatively excellent calculations. My grand total of music heard in the program is 45 minutes 10 seconds, and that's about 5 minutes 39 per episode. Both this and my final stories examples offer stark contrast to the first 2 regarding usage. Consequently, I'll present the soundtrack releases totals as well as my complete totals now to highlight the extent to which composers could economize. In the program, only 12 discrete tracks are used in the whole of the story's 3-hour runtime. This, despite a shocking 32 tracks presented on the release. 32 tracks, 32 minutes credited. The discrepancy is largely due to the offering of 17, generally very short, sting tracks. To my ears, only one of the 17 is ever used. The release also includes a looped version of an already included track, and like tracks from the Daleks release, it represents what was heard in the program. Amongst 3 unused longer tracks, at least one proves Harper's music wasn't excluded for lack of trying. Trapped in Gas Chamber, Music 4, was meant for a 10-second Episode 1 scene, though the music is 45 seconds long. But in the event, Camfield declined to use music. All totaled, the soundtrack presents 18 minutes 27 seconds of recorded music. But 7 minutes 44 is completely unused, and a further minute of loops, etc. is also excluded from my totals. Thus, the grand total of discrete music heard in 8 episodes of The Invasion is a shocking 9 minutes 21 seconds. Obviously, there are massive amounts of cue reuse by director Camfield, behaving as if Harper's tracks are stock music, perhaps. Episode 1 features 5 of the 12 discrete tracks, but one receives 4 iterations, a distinctive sting made of, at a guess, strummed cymbalum strings with an object overlaid that produces an extra rattling effect. This sting, titled Music 15B, will be used a total of 15 times over the 8 episodes. Further, in Episode 1, 2 tracks entitled The Company, Music 7, I will abbreviate to M7, and Hiding, M8, are looped to underscore extended scenes.
This company, what do they do?
International Electromagics. I'm sure you've heard of them.
Well, no, we've been a little out of touch.
You must have been.
M7 is heard 7 times, once in each episode, bar Episode 7. While M8 is heard 6 times, most prominently in Episodes 1 and 6.
Benton, grenade!
This latter track features a soprano saxophone. Or so I thought. Reputable printed sources say it is oboe or English horn. 5 further tracks are revealed in Episode 2. The only instance of the Cyber Director, M5, with its distinctive clarinet line, inaugurates the episode. The track entitled The Cybermen My Allies, confusingly also listed as M7, is briefly introduced,
Come on, we'll try down here.
but is found most prominently in the final episode, as the Doctor and Tobias Vaughn struggle to reach the radio transmitter to cut off the Cyberfleet's homing signal. Interestingly, this longest iteration of the music is made of 2 unequal cuts. One, about 19.5 seconds, is pasted to another of only 17 seconds. This roughly 36.5 seconds is then made into a loop to support the entire scene. The jolly major-scale-based Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart M12A, featuring piccolo and bass clarinet atop cymbalum, electric bass, and percussion, is first presented here, but has 3 iterations in the final 2 episodes, including the final scene. Also introduced is the track Plans for Invasion, M8, another band number reused confusingly. It opens with the sting effect, but is followed by a creepy contrabass clarinet line and a percussive knocking effect. Used 12 times over the story, it's heard mostly in the latter half and often underscores Vaughn's tense conversations with the Cyber Director.
Yes, I'll deal with them.
Plans for invasion are nearing completion.
Must have gone out.
Finally, Mysteries, M12, a suitably moody track featuring vibraphone, cymbalum, and electric bass, receives the first 2 of 8 iterations across 5 episodes. After 2 episodes, that's basically the lot, except for 2 tracks.
Come on, Jamie. Oh, wait a minute, Doctor.
Fire Escape, M11, is given its one and only sounding in episode 3, as the Doctor and Jamie climb out of an elevator shaft onto the roof and discover the eponymous ladder structures that allow them egress off of the IE building, i.e. a fire escape.
Come on.
Later, episode 6 provides the only instance of a variation on the very first track heard in the story. The same percussive knocking sound from Plans for Invasion is added to The Dark Side of the Moon, M2, distinguishing it from 3 other iterations lacking the knocking, and otherwise featuring Hammond organ, cymbalum, and electric bass. The use of only 50.7% of the recorded soundtrack in the finished program might be disappointing to the composer. He seems to have done just fine because, astonishingly, 79.3% of the music you hear as you watch the invasion is music you've already heard.
We're back in history, Jamie. One of the most terrible times on the planet Earth.
As if signaling his impending ubiquity in the decade to come, Dudley Simpson scored the final 3 Doctor Who stories of Season 6. Another Doctor was taking his curtain call, and the program produced its final episodes in black and white. After his first commission in 1964 by director and associate producer Mervyn Pinfield,
It hasn't vanished at all.
Simpson became one of a revolving roster of composers, and as I mentioned, was the only composer apart from Don Harper commissioned during the Patrick Troughton era. Simpson had, by 1969, shown himself willing to embrace technological advances that were becoming more practical. Still, he relied on Brian Hodgson and the Radiophonic Workshop for invaluable assistance and collaboration. Of the final 3 Troughton stories Simpson scored, the finally final 10-episode The War Games is the least electronic, although the acoustic ensemble of brass, winds, piano, pipe organ, and percussion was later, in some cases, treated radiophonically. Disgustingly few of Dudley Simpson's recorded soundtracks survive separately to this day. Out of 62 stories, only 12 have at least some material, and desperately few survive complete. The War Games is not one. In fact, no recordings survive. So, like 100,000 BC, I'll have a little less information to go on. Simpson was commissioned for the War Games, presumably by director David Maloney, on the 17th of March 1969, for the telerecording on the 11th of April, a decent amount of time. No paperwork survives regarding recording dates, but we know some of his other recent sessions were perilously, yet mundanely, close calls. The Seeds of Death's music was recorded on the 30th of December 1968, for the telerecording 4 days later on the 3rd of January 1969. However, the Space Pirates music was safely in the can on the 13th of February 1969, for the telerecording 8 days later. The PSB documents are the case study winners in terms of detail, featuring a rare inclusion of track titles. More on that in a moment.
Quick, in here.
A total of 23 minutes 30 seconds is accounted for here. And now, here are my own timings. The total comes to 26 minutes 35 seconds of music heard, or about 2 minutes 40 per episode. Not quite as accurate as the Daleks comparisons, but not wildly inaccurate either. Discrepancies might be explained in this case thanks to those track titles, in that only those are quantified. Taking episode 3 as an example, the P as B lists Alien theme, Roman theme, and Confederate theme, giving timings for each. Their accuracy is not bad, but the other stings and previously used tracks seem unaccounted for. The most accurate episode timings are, as seen before, the ones with the least music.
I'm heading for E, but I seem to have got...
Although there is plenty of reuse, that's because there's plenty of choice. To start, 11 tracks are introduced in the first episode.
You will be executed at dawn tomorrow.
Out of a massive 19 total musical cues. Only one new track is found in episode 2, the cliffhanger Roman theme. While out of 4 new tracks in episode 3, 2 are 3 seconds long stings.
And you are going to be shot.
Episode 4 reveals 6 new tracks, 3 of which are stings, bringing the total to 22.
Romans.
Not until episode 6 is track number 23 introduced. Music as Russell fights a hypnotized rebel soldier, Private Moore. After the brand new Mexican theme in episode 8, introducing Villa and his band of rebels, we get a sudden influx of new music in the final 2 episodes. These bring the grand total of discrete tracks in the War Games to 32.
Come with me.
Now, just a moment. What's going on around here?
This influx and the complete disappearance of any tracks from the first 8 episodes suggests that Simpson was commissioned for a second batch. Although no recording dates are documented, his ensemble diminishes from 5 to 4 musicians in these final episodes. Except, I think this paperwork is wrong. I still count 5 musicians in these new tracks. Even so, I think a second session took place. For that reason, it's fairer to compare only the first 8 episodes of the War Games with, for example, the 8 episodes of the Invasion. Excluding Mexican theme, presumed to be part of the later recording session, that's 23 tracks. Like Harper's score, there's plenty of scope for reuse. Indeed, only 8 tracks are used singly, with 5 of those being stings. The big winner is... Alien theme. Used at least once in all 8 episodes, its sinister mood of horn, muted trumpet, clarinet, organ, and percussion fills our ears 18 times.
Very convenient. Right next to a machine gun emplacement.
I was on my way to the hospital.
The complete 38-second version is heard only once in episode 2, as Lady Jennifer relates to Carstairs her experience with the mysterious mist.
Mist? Fog? Then I was in a field dressing station looking after some wounded soldiers.
A nearly complete version of 33 seconds, losing a bit of beginning and end, is our introduction to this music in episode 1. In his quarters, General Smythe is disturbed by the well-meaning Sergeant Major offering tea, getting his head bitten off by the General for his efforts.
Don't ever come through that door without knocking! Get out!
Right, sir.
There's more to Alien Theme's story, however, because there are 4 versions of it. A medium version is 24 seconds long, while a short version is 11.
You realize we have saved your life.
And a sting version of only the final chords is 3 seconds.
Look at that! do you believe us?
The difference between each version is increasingly excised material, a unique situation in the case studies. Since the PSB lists only one alien theme, it's tempting to treat them as one track. Only the two shortest versions could possibly be cut-down edits, but these cuts are usually detectable orally. So, because these are, to my ear, at least 3, possibly 4 distinct recordings, I count them as 4 tracks. The opening long, evocative track entitled Drum Beats is used 9 times, but almost never the same way twice. The first minute features long passages of timpani and a single hovering organ note, occasionally relieved by brass chorales. The ending section, often used by itself, adds a snare drum march. Heard only in the first 4 episodes, it's usually associated with the stark World War I setting. 2 similar tracks connected with mystery and hypnosis are heard 7 and 8 times respectively.
It is quite clear that they are all guilty.
They begin with different music, one featuring a rising vibraphone line.
There is nothing there.
The other an extended organ line.
I was asleep, Captain Ransom. You did not wish to disturb me.
But end with essentially the same passage, featuring trilling clarinet underneath earnest brass harmonies. These 2 endings are definitely distinct, rather than a matter of splicing tape.
All guilty.
Yes, they're guilty. Knew it as soon as I looked at them.
He's talking nonsense.
However, some instances of both of these tracks are truncated.
Listen to me, Sergeant Major.
It's no use, Carstairs.
And in one instance, a cut and paste extension is used.
Now sit down again.
Don't you talk to me like that, I'm a British officer.
That nearly doubles the track's original length.
I'm not your prisoner, more. I'm your commanding officer, do you understand?
Not in the army. The resistance, I mean.
Several other tracks receive a limited number of outings, including one I transcribed called Resistance Theme. And speaking of mysteries, the Roman theme was so intriguing, I'm making another video about it. Stay tuned. Counting only these first 23 tracks, they represent 9 minutes 8 seconds of discrete music out of 21 minutes 57 seconds heard. Compared to The Invasion, there's much more variety here, yet much less music was heard overall. This is due to, first, an almost complete lack of track looping or extending in the war games. Second, the many scenes in the Alien Control Center from Episode 4 onwards have rich sound effect atmospheres, and so Maloney elected to keep things uncluttered. Even so, both directors clearly made much reuse of their musical resources. As I mentioned, the last 2 episodes, plus Episode 8's Mexican theme, are a breath of fresh musical air. Although there's not much music in Episode 9, the 2 tracks used are new. The second, the organ theme of the Time Lords, is introduced in the cliffhanger and not only resumes in Episode 10, but musically resolves in 2 different ways.
Get a wheel light, Doctor! I hope so, Jamie!
There is no escape, Doctor. Return the TARDIS immediately to our home planet.
It even gets a reprise via reorchestration, which makes the brass more prominent. Aside from these Time Lord variations, every other track in episode 10 is new and unique. Counting these 9 new tracks alone, they represent 4 minutes 38 seconds of screen sound, of which only 47 seconds, just under 17%, is reused.
The time has come for you to change your appearance, Doctor, and begin your exile.
Finally, treating the story as a 10-episode whole once again, the 26 minutes 35 seconds heard features 12 minutes 59 seconds of discrete music, pulling the final percentage of reused music down to just over 51%.
In this graph, this column represents 23% of the population. This column represents 28% of the population, and this column represents 43% of the population. Telling figures indeed.
What can we learn from these facts and figures? The goal for experienced 60s TV composers was to provide enough musical options for their story's dramatic needs. Their output must be neither too meager, leaving the director wanting, nor too generous, wasting their own time and possibly cutting their earnings. Each case study has at least one instance of track variations. Kay's "da-na", Carrie's 3 city musics, Harper's 2 Dark Side of the Moons, and Simpson's 4 alien themes are all examples of options. On the other hand, the 3 case studies with unused tracks prove composers must have expected the omission of some of their efforts. Although I'm speaking here by ear, if you will, it is exceedingly rare at best for a story of the first 7 seasons to use every track of original music just once. Though Tristram Cary created more scene-specific tracks thanks to practical necessity, composers did not, in general, have the time to write new pieces for every bit of script where a director wanted music, as later became feasible. They must have planned for track reuse, knowing that directors would choose to do so. It's clear directors didn't usually have much time to select tracks for their episode 1s. This time crunch could explain why they might just fall in love with tracks from early episodes, becoming their first thought when needing music later. For certain, reusing music creates recurring themes and thus musical continuity. I must admit, however, that the last 2 case studies are exceptional in their degree of track reuse. This might otherwise give the viewer the impression that composers could record between 10 and 15 minutes discrete music for any length story and get away with it. My sense is, though The Invasion and The War Games are uncommon examples, soundtracks of, say, 30-plus discrete minutes are also uncommon. Whatever the reasons for these wide variations, the composer, the director, the budget, only an exhaustive study would provide proper perspective. Meanwhile, why are the PSB documented totals so inaccurate compared to what was actually used? Clearly, no one was tasked with using a stopwatch and totting up the totals during transmission. Could composers inflate their totals? No. A set of recordings delivered to a production is a pretty tangible proof of work. Could a sympathetic director pad the totals, allowing, for example, a composer to earn 32 minutes worth of fees for delivering 18 and a half, with almost half of that unused? Maybe, but unlikely, never mind, unsavory. The comparisons confirm a fair correlation between music heard and credited. That was certainly the point. It was clearly the documented timing that mattered regarding composers' payments. For example, in the case of 100,000 BC, the totals were reported to copyright by the director's assistant, were the basis for the fees paid, and were duly reproduced in the PSBs. No doubt this process was replicated for the other three stories, but the dramatic over-credit in Norman Kaye's favor is interesting. The two existing soundtracks prove that recordings, or portions of them, were omitted from the finished programs. As a further example outside of my case studies, a complete track list for Season 2's The Chase, music by Simpson, exists. This proves differences between what was recorded and what was used were known and documented. Knowing me, I'll probably make a video about it. So, perhaps, those documented totals contained, comfortingly, an acknowledgement of some music unused. It's much easier, pleasing, and even logical to see the Invasions example as a moderately generous middle ground between these timing extremes. I can only hope that these totals do not point to a sad amount of lost music by these composers. If the written scores exist, we may learn the truth. At least, though, they were paid for their work. What did the future hold? By late 1970, just in time for Season 8, Jon Pertwee's second season, the future was now. Although mainly a cost-cutting measure, producer Barry Letts prevailed upon Simpson, again with vital help from Hodgson, to produce the entire season's music on a new synthesizer, the EMS VCS-3. A device co-designed by Tristram Cary, by the way. Because of the painstaking and time-consuming effort required to produce music in this way, it made sense to recycle tracks, particularly during the master season.
No! You will obey me.
Music of The Mind of Evil is notable for tracks Simpson recycled in basically every subsequent master story of his.
I am the master. You will listen to me, and you will obey me.
The other major advance ready for Season 8 was post-production. Now, the drama was tele-recorded first, and composers given an edited, time-coded videotape. They could then sculpt their music to the action and subsequently have their tracks dubbed onto the final edited tape. Simpson has said that this innovation was prompted by his own struggles. Whatever the reason, this made it possible for composers to write specific music to fit specific scenes.
Well, he used to be a friend of mine once. A very good friend. In fact, you might almost say we were at school together.
How long's he going to be here?
Forever, I should think.
Ready for off then?
In other words, composers could write more music with less waste, knowing that a track would fit a scene as precisely as their skill allowed. For example, by the Tom Baker era, Simpson was writing soundtracks of 10+ minutes per episode, where directors desired.
We've done it, Harry. We've done it.
Extremes include Season 13's 4-part Planet of Evil, and Season 14's 4-part The Face of Evil. The latter includes a Simpson record 15 minutes 13 seconds soundtrack, supporting about 2/3 of Part 3. I timed it. It's true. Moving the series firmly into the 80s, this trend continued. To take another extreme example, Peter Howell's complete soundtrack to The Leisure Hive, the first story where Simpsons services were no longer required, totals 53.5 minutes. This for a story whose 4-part length ran severely short.
Doctor!
Howell overtook Simpsons' record by providing 17 minutes 40 seconds of music for Part 4. Excluding the theme music, that left just under 2 minutes of story without music. By the way, the PSBs seem to become much more accurate in their music timings, apparently thanks to post-production. By 1980, timings of each individual track were printed. There are also scattered listings of recorded but unused music, though who knows what effect this had when they cut the composers' checks. Hopefully it was positive, as composers were hardly responsible for a director's last-minute editing decision. Reuse of tracks became largely a thing of the past as the 70s continued, though there are a few curious cases. Although Season 10's Frontier in Space is well into the post-production period, director Paul Bernard treated Simpsons music a bit more like raw material than his contemporaries. A good example is the music of the Doctor's Spacewalks from episodes 4 and 6. Best explained in my performance videos on that subject. See also my Music for Spaceships analysis video for a rare instance of unused music from this period. Another example is Season 14's The Robots of Death. Although Simpson must have written bespoke tracks, a sizable portion of track reuse occurs, particularly in Part 4.
To find and destroy all remaining humans. Secrecy is no longer necessary. Confirmed. The order is understood. Then
I heard a cry.
Was director Michael E. Bryant so old school? Or were Simpsons tracks for the climactic episode lacking in some way? Who knows?
That was me.
I heard a cry.
Before post-production, composers provided melodic moods. It was the director who decided how to use and reuse their mood music, often provided, at the beginning of production at least, at short notice. The short notice part didn't necessarily change, but composers' ability to see the drama they were writing for was a double-edged sword. Directors could ask for bespoke music for any scene, while eager composers could inspire themselves to provide all that was required, potentially more than doubling their output from just a few years earlier.
There we are.
The increasing practicality and affordability of music technology by the end of the 1970s was also a double-edged sword. Simpson complained right from the beginning that synthesizers alone had no impact, had no emotion whatsoever. I must admit that for many years, Simpsons Season 8 soundtracks left me cold as well. This explains his re-inclusion of acoustic instruments, starting with percussion in Season 9 onwards. It's unfair, however, to level that criticism at music from 10 or 15 years later. In the 1980s, composers produced soundtracks that sounded like multiple musicians, using sound samples to recreate acoustic instruments as best as current tech and their own skill provided. Could this economical one-person band approach have convinced producer John Nathan Turner to give over incidental music duties to radiophonic workshop composers, similar to Season 8's downsizing? It's impossible to deny, though, that nothing dates a Doctor Who story like a synth saxophone.
Now what have you landed us in?
Hey, intruders!
Composers recognized, like Simpson, the benefit of also using acoustic instruments to heighten their scores. For example, Paddy Kingsland augmented his Season 18 Logopolis soundtrack with electric guitar and electric bass. Later composers would follow suit, including Jonathan Gibbs
Good night, sire.
and Dominic Glynn. Most noticeable is that in the years following Season 8, it became necessary for composers to stop writing so many melodies and start writing more atmosphere. In a way, this need for sparer musical textures makes the composer's job easier and perhaps facilitated increased output. For the viewer, however, soundtracks could become a touch less memorable.
Green! I told you!
The best composers, however, find a way. Doctor Who managed to enlist a wide array of musical styles and talents in its initial 26-season run. Although producers are now the ones who hire composers, that creative musical tradition continues today.